Welcome everyone to the Taking Charge Peer Support Network session, Who Wants a Cure? We'd like to acknowledge and extend our appreciation to the traditional custodians of the lands upon which we're all meeting. We pay our respects to their leaders and elders, past, present and emerging, for they hold the memories, traditions, culture and hopes of all the people of these lands. This land was never ceded and is still Aboriginal land. My name is Vic Perry and I'm a Health Promotion Officer with Living Positive Victoria, and I co-coordinate the Taking Charge project for people with HIV 50 years of age and up.
Hi everyone, I'm Jerry O'Brien and I'm the HIV Peer Support and Health Promotion Officer at the Positive Living Centre. I work for Thorn Harbour Health, and I also co-coordinate the Taking Charge project in partnership with Vic. Now, before we have our group discussion, let's first hear from Craig Burnett and Brent Clifton, who recorded this conversation for us earlier. Craig will give us some of the science and set the scene with where we are at with the cure today. And Brent will bring in the community perspective and briefly tell us about some of the consultation he conducted in the community.
I'm Craig Burnett and I'm the Senior Policy and Research Officer at Living Positive Victoria and a community representative for the HIV Cure Consortium in Melbourne, Australia.
And hi, my name is Brent Clifton. I'm the Deputy Director at the National Association of People Living with HIV Australia, and I've been involved recently with some HIV cure research studies and consulting with the community. So, Craig, as a member of the HIV Cure Consortium, would you mind telling us what the purpose of your role is and what the current state of play is with cure research?
So the Community Advisory Board has recently just undergone a little bit of a change. Originally, they were there so that we could review all of the research that had applied for grants to make sure that they were appropriately, surveying people living with HIV throughout their research. Now that all the grant rounds have ended, our role is a little bit more about research development in the future, so making sure that people living with HIV have a hand in how the research is developed, what fields we want to see cures developed in. And a little bit of that is also about taking that research and making it accessible for the general community so that they can understand the science that's actually happening. HIV cure research in Australia at the moment is just about to enter into treatment interruption trials, which is going to be a very interesting phase. I don't think they've started yet, but I think we're going to have a few obstacles as about how and why people might want to go on treatment interruption trials or why they might not want to, especially in the age of undetectable equals untransmissible. Now, Brent, you've been doing some work yourself in this space and have actually done some consulting of workers in the HIV sector. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, thanks, Craig. So I guess earlier in the year, about May, through my work with some researchers down in Melbourne, I was invited to present at an upcoming conference on what community perspectives of HIV cure research was. So my approach to the presentation was to develop a survey and perform some short interviews with PLHIV who work within the HIV community sector, sort of understand what they know about cure research, where they go to get their information, and what they talk to clients about cure research, if at all. So setting about that task, I developed a short survey, which I distributed. I performed 3 interviews, and I really wanted to get to the bottom of the questions of what do we actually understand about research studies themselves, what specific information or what specific places do people go to get information about a HIV cure, what do HIV cure studies involve, and what do we know about them, what are people prepared to do for HIV cure research, which was probably the most interesting part of the process for me, because I also got to learn about the varying levels of participation that people can make in cure trials, from filling out a survey to, as you said, Craig, treatment interruptions and what they mean for people and how they can do it safely. And finally, we wanted to sort of understand what the role of the media played in informing people's decisions. You know, we hear a lot about very famous cure cases, but they happen in isolation, and we wanted to know the impact of those on people's understanding of where cure is. And finally, we just wanted to ask, how close did people actually think a cure is? Is it around the corner, or are we still waiting for a few years before that comes our way? So that's the background, which I'll leave there. And I think you're up next, Craig.
Yeah, it's always interesting, how far away is 5 years away from a cure.
Yeah.
Now that we've set the scene and given you some insight into what's happening in the area of HIV cure research, we hope you all have a very fruitful discussion. Let us know what you think. Over to you, Vic.
Thanks very much for that, Craig and Brent. Now, the first thing I'm thinking of is, what do we think of what we've just heard, considering that and considering what we may already know about cure, of what we perhaps have already read or seen in the media. So what are your first thoughts around that?
Well, I mean, it's about the logistics of the cure. Will you be having injections for 12 months before that it actually works? Will you be able to take one single thing, like a dose or an injection, or what? Will that fix the problem? That sounds a bit unlikely. And of course, as they touched on there, how long away is it anyway? And, Sharon Lewin sort of seemed to think in a session I was watching the other day, Professor Sharon Lewin, maybe within the next 5 years. Well, if that happens, I hope I'm still here for it.
We'll hope we'll still be here. Yeah, it's interesting, 5 years. It's you wonder how they put a number on it. And if anyone would know, it'd be Sharon Lewin, of course.
She was thinking that is possible. She wasn't saying take that as a Bible gospel.
No, that's right. Yeah. What do you think, Jerry?
Once again, if I was going to ask David, but there was did they say why? Did she say why 5 years? Like, is it because they've got something there testing now?
Yes, she did. She did, Jerry. Yeah. She said something about we are onto something called antibodies. Does anyone else hear that?
Yeah, there was a session recently, and she was talking about that, broadly neutralising antibodies. And so it's something that's quite novel as a technology itself that's been used in other areas. And so there's something that seems quite promising.
COVID work had helped in some ways with them thinking about this. I can't remember why.
Yeah. So they're working at a pace. There seems to be a decent pace that they're working at that seems to give us some promise. Yeah, another thing that I think about too is, what are we prepared to do to go into trials? Craig was talking about that they're starting, and in fact, there are currently trials happening at the moment that many people know about because there are only a few people at a time in those trials. But just sort of thinking what we would generally want or be happy to do to be a part of a trial. So, I'm talking about, are we happy to just fill out a survey? Are we happy to go as far as giving a blood sample or even a tissue biopsy? Or are we happy to, in fact, we're asked to temporarily stop our treatments as part of a trial? So how far would we want to go in a trial?
I filled out the survey and I thought about that a lot. And it would be so dependent, as David said, what their expectations, I think, and also commitment. Like we're working, you've got a life, so what sort of commitment you have to put into it, the time commitment you have to put into a trial. Yeah. Things like that I would make you think, but and also when I'm stable, currently stable, I would be nervous that there'd be change. You know, I don't want to go back. Things like that. So the anxiety about that, I don't know. Would you agree with that, David?
Yeah,
Definitely. There's no way I'm going back to risking getting another AIDS-defining illness. Thank you very much.
Exactly. Yeah, you do.
I think it would be carefully monitored, and I think that they wouldn't allow a situation where, you know, your viral load goes up to a point and your CD4 count goes down to a point where you're at risk of getting ill. But the thought of it, though, the thinking that, I think the same. You know, I think to myself, everything's going fine at the moment, so why would I stop taking my treatments, which are working, even if it's temporary? Because it would only be temporary. We're not talking about long term, but in terms of a trial, in the context of a trial, it would only be temporary. Even so, you know, even a week or 2 weeks or,
Exactly,
or
that's
3,
right.
that scares me, you know.
And change can come quickly. We all know that.
And it's that thought, that what you said too, Jerry, about what if something goes wrong and I can't go back to what I'm on and I have to change and I have to try something else. That's always an issue, you know. Now, for anyone who's on treatments, a thought is always there that if it stops working, what else, you know, and you have to go on something else. That's always there anyway. So I don't want to do anything. I'd rather not do anything that's going to jeopardise that. But it's still a dilemma, though, because we still want to do the right thing as well, and we all want a cure, but we have to play a part in it to see that it happens. Because if we don't, then it just makes the researcher's job much more difficult.
I think people who are long-termers wouldn't be their main target, I wouldn't think. My T cells are in there around the 280 mark. And, you know, that wouldn't take too much to get me under the 200 and make me vulnerable. Whereas I would think somebody who maybe has come along, not been HIV positive for that long and hasn't even started treatments, they would be a prime candidate to try something like this in the hope that it would have some benefit for them, but it wouldn't have a major deleterious effect on them, which it would on the long termers, I think, more likely on the long term.
And I have met a couple of people who are in trials and they are relatively newly diagnosed. You know, they have had HIV for a few years. They're not long term. Their anxiety isn't as great as perhaps people like you and myself. I've had HIV for 34 years. And it's been long enough that I like the way things are going at the moment, and I have a little bit of that fear, whereas someone newly diagnosed may not have the same level of anxiety.
When you're older, you probably have way too many other conditions or complicating conditions. Whereas when you're younger or newly diagnosed, you as a researcher, you probably have a much better starting point, because older people, they have so many variables and diseases that come with aging, or they are on all sorts of medication. And I think the group is too diverse to draw conclusions from the trials if you allow for a wide range of people, age groups, and different medical history.
Yeah, makes sense.
So assumedly Sharon's running a trial in Australia. Is there a number of different trials, do we know?
I'm not sure how many there are, but they do exist. I've spoken recently to someone who's in a trial. This person's quite keen to participate and see that there's a positive outcome. So it's just a matter of, I guess, tapping into to people's desire to be a part of this journey and to see a cure happen sooner than later. And that's the only way it's going to happen. If we want a cure sooner than later, there needs to be numbers and there needs to be a good amount of participation by our community. That's up to us, I guess.
We haven't mentioned media yet, Vic. And, you know, how, as far as participating in these in surveys, as David just said, but we think it's one's happening in Melbourne. How do you know? And has anyone seen? When we see it within that sector, probably, but on general media, do you ever see things like this promoted?
Very little.
Because we don't see much of HIV anyway.
No,
And especially now.
research. even with COVID, there must be, once again, there'd be research. There's probably the same sort of trials with whatever condition. You'd have to be linked in, or your doctor would have to be interested, or
I think that would be the one thing that probably would rule people in or out, whether their doctor thinks they're suitable for it.
Yeah, true.
Just putting up an ad in a paper, would you like to be part of the cure for, I mean, that's probably fair enough. People can put their hand up, but I would think a doctor would have to be involved, ideally.
Yeah.
In deciding, are you a great risk if you do this? I'm sure none of my doctors would let me.
But also to control that group based on all of their other pre-existing conditions.
Yes, exactly.
Yep. And I guess our GP or our primary health professional would know us best more than anyone else. So in terms of guiding us into deciding whether we participate or not, they would know. Do we talk about it much with our peers? No, is it? We just talked about what we've seen in the media. Do people talk about it in our community, of positive people?
Well, the discussions I hear about treatment is how good it is you only have 2 pills, or 1 in some cases. The only concern some people have is they forget it sometimes. Whereas in the old days, I was part of some a NAPWHA thing the other day, and I said I had 34 pills a day when I started. So I don't know I know you wouldn't have been doing that, Vic, but that was way back in 95. The very early protease inhibitors, a drug called sequinavir had 18 pills 4 times a day. And one of those pills you were supposed to get up at 2 in the morning to take. Yeah. Now, when you think about that change, any long-termer will say, aren't we lucky we only have to take 1 or 2 pills a day? And we're grateful. And, for going from 34 pills a day to 2, well, yeah, they were the antivirals. They were just the antivirals, by the way.
And it's interesting because we're even up to an injection once every couple of months.
That's right.
So it's an interesting dichotomy, actually, where we've got treatments becoming so much easier to take, and in terms of convenience and tolerability of side effects, that kind of thing, weighing up that against going for a cure, it's almost easy to think, well, why bother when the treatment themselves is becoming so much easier. There's this kind of balancing act that needs to be done between those 2 things that are happening at the moment. Because, one day it'll be 1 injection every 6 months, or even 1 injection every 12 months. So the desire for a cure is becoming sort of, well, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's not top order for people thinking. I know that. But what I would say, though, I'd be interested, and we don't know the answer to this, if it happened, whether it decreases the inflammation in your body for long-termers. Because that's what's, the inflammation that's caused other things like diabetes. I've had cancer, I've had a heart attack. And it's long-term, but those things are as much related to my HIV as anything else, as well as getting old and all of those things. So trying to get a handle on how you anyway, I just don't think it's going to happen. But
what you were trying to say is how a cure may actually be preventative to related conditions?
Yes, well, if you get rid of the inflammation, the trouble is, I think, if you've had it a long time, the inflammation has done the damage. The argument doctors have told me is, even though you're on good treatments now, David, they're keeping you alive. The inflammation that happened when you didn't have treatments or when you had inferior treatments, even the proteases had some problems. I think they caused high cholesterol, and that was a factor for heart attack. If you take those things out of the picture, that would be probably a great plus if you could get rid of the inflammation, but I still think it's probably not going to help long-termers. Maybe the medium-term people will benefit from it, but the ones that haven't had a lot of internal mitochondrial damage or whatever they call it.
Well, I think that's a great point, and it all comes down to communication and education. So people being newly diagnosed, if they were to know that, yeah, you can be on treatment, but it's not a cure, and there could be other conditions related to your situation, the motivation to start looking for a cure will actually go up. And I don't think we know enough yet about what the virus does and doesn't do. If people with the virus get other conditions, then you may be told like, oh, it's related, but there's not really a lot of evidence.
That's true. And an interesting aspect, though, in terms of, and it's a good thing you brought up, inflammation, which is the bottom line of the problem. And even people who relatively new are diagnosed and who have been able to start treatment straight away, that group of people would benefit greatly from a cure. One reason would be that unfortunately, while we're on treatments, we still have that low level of inflammation. There's still a lot of not too much known about what it means, but immunosenescence, which is what it's called, is something that continues regardless of how well our treatments are working. What does that mean in the long term? There's still a bit of a grey area. But if a cure comes along and actually eliminates at least HIV and stops that low level of continual inflammation, that could make a big difference. Yeah, still a lot of work to do. There are those of us who may think, well, we question how much of a difference might make, but there's still a lot of people who are, I guess, newer diagnosed and people who have been able to start treatment who their immune systems are relatively intact, but they still may benefit. And of course, there's the global issues of so many people around the world who can't go on treatments and not able to go on treatments for a variety of reasons. There are still people being diagnosed and there are still people dying. So, we know that there's a good reason for a cure anyway at a global level, no matter how good we think we are in Australia in terms of advancement and access to treatments. The motivation question.
To participate in a trial?
I had a chat recently with a person who's in a trial, and I did a bit of an interrogation and I asked the person, what actually motivates you to be in this trial? What is the thing that gets you to participate and dampen any anxiety that you might have of being in the trial? And they said joy. They said the simple word of joy. They had joy in knowing that they were a part of what might be a complicated process, but a process that potentially has an amazing outcome, which a cure would be an incredible thing to happen. And it gave this person joy to be a part of this process. And that's not something I would have thought of. I wouldn't have thought of joy, but it was interesting that that's what they thought of. So what do you think? What would be a good motivation? And particularly, how would we tap into motivation? How would the HIV sector tap into whatever the motivation is for people to get into trials?
Well, Vic, my first line of attack would be to ask if that person was prepared to be part of an advertising campaign or within the community maybe, but something that communicated that message. It's a nice message, I'm doing good for other people. Would you like to join me? Something like that.
Great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
I mean, I would do it if I could take my HIV treatments at the same time, but I guess one kills the other. If it was possible to say, is it possible for you to take this treatment and we can somehow assess whether it has some effect on your viral load or your treatment? I guess it doesn't because my viral load's undetectable now, so how would they tell? But
it'd be
some biological marker they could use to say, this is improving your chances of you becoming totally negative to HIV completely, then I'd do it. But obviously I can't give up my treatments. So if it's not possible to do that, then it's going to have to be the younger generation of people with HIV.
But yeah, I'm trying to think if it can be done, if you can be on treatment and, the antivirals plus whatever the new experimental drug is at the same time, and can they differentiate what the outcome is in terms of reduction in viral load, even, obviously which would have to be below undetectable since the antivirals are already doing that. So, how do they differentiate? I don't know.
There might be side effects from these treatments too. We'd have to be worried about that.
I think it's really complicated research because you typically work with a control group that doesn't get all of the treatment being analyzed. So if people in your test group or your trial group already are on a whole lot of other medications for whatever reason, it becomes increasingly complex. And to that point that we made earlier, people that are already aging have more conditions than just HIV. It may become increasingly complex to actually measure accurately what the impact is of the new treatments. I think we're all so different. And in particular, as you get older, we get even more different in all the conditions we've got and the medications we're on. And you can't ask people to stop just everything. So, it is really difficult, I think. So to that point, probably the people that are newly diagnosed and that haven't got many other conditions or are not on a whole lot of other medication, they are much better candidates to participate in the trial. But the motivation, I think, should really be similar to the person you spoke to. It does give joy if you can help other people, if you are actually contributing to a major breakthrough going forward. And I'm sure there have been people participating in lots of trials to get us to where we are today. But there needs to be more in the media about it, about the need to do it, the benefits of doing it. And I think currently that story isn't there.
Yeah, and I guess tapping into that altruism as a motive, which, we're quite well known in our community for participating in research, whether it be social research like the Futures Survey or any other kind of research. There are plenty of people who think about being happy to give to the community because many people have benefited from the community. We've all benefited at one stage or another from accessing services and support in our community, particularly when we're newly diagnosed. So there's a lot of people out there who would be more than happy to participate and give back to the community. A way of doing it too is using peers. There's nothing better than having a peer with a positive experience talking about their experience in something like being in a trial to be able to convince us that to be a part of it as well. If I had to listen to anyone, I would want to listen to another peer and hear about their positive experience. That would help convince me.
I think too, even with this little discussion we've had here, we as a group aren't going to be really approached for this type of trial anymore. I don't believe we can do the surveys, we can do that sort of thing, definitely. But I don't think as even over 50, I think we're all well over 50. And I'm over 60.
And I'm 60.
Yeah. So
I'm over 70.
70.
Doing well, But anyway, the point is, I don't think we wouldn't be useful and as participants in a scientific trial like that.
Hopefully, we'd still get the benefit from the outcome. Eventually. Yes. But it's interesting you bring up the age factor because that's what we're mentioning. What we've just mentioned is our chronological age. There's a biological age which we are told by researchers, which is more than our chronological age. And it used to be something that was 10 to 15 years more than our chronological age. The latest research I've read is it's around 5 years, which is still enough. It's still a substantial amount of time. So I'm 60 and my chronological age and my biological age is around 65 to 70. So that's something we need to consider too.
Does that mean we're allowed to retire a bit?
Well, that's a whole nother discussion about retirement and access to government pensions and all of that sort of stuff. That's a whole other discussion.
Look, also there's so many other people with other medical conditions that increase their biological age.
Yes.
So if we allow everyone to to get access to retirement of pensions or whatever, I think it would become impossible to manage.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not just HIV, but there are any number of conditions that could do it. That I guess have an impact on inflammation.
Any chronic condition, really. It's been with it for a while. It's going to have effect. So.
And then if you have multiple, then you may retire at 30.
Hey, Mickey.
I should have done something then 30 years ago. I should have made up some things. But no, a number of people have already done that anyway, have retired when they were diagnosed, particularly back in the early days.
Like me.
There wasn't the prospect of good treatments wasn't there back then in the 80s, so or early 90s. So many people retired because of HIV. Well, that was a current discussion, I guess, back then. Today, not so much, but back then it certainly was. Like, what more information would we want that we haven't talked about or heard from Craig or Brent? Any other anxieties, any other concerns that we might have?
One other thing I remember, I think it was even mentioned on the survey about these studies and having a placebo and a real drug as a test.
Yeah, that's a worry.
Yeah, like I would just, if that was the case, I mean, obviously you had to be told that before, but I just wouldn't, it'd be a no-go.
Of course.
It'd be difficult to be in it, yeah. There'd be a difficult decision to make, and most of us probably, like you said, the fear would just be too much. Too great to participate.
I think it could be made a bit easier to find any trials or where the research is going, the way they're thinking, and also to better understand what actually the impact, the cost impact, or the burden on the healthcare system is for people with HIV. Because I know with all sorts of medical conditions, there are statistics on how you impact on the healthcare system, and certain conditions are really high, have a really high impact, and obviously those ones attract more research funding just to bring that healthcare cost down. But I don't actually know where HIV would sit in that regard. That would probably be an important driver to attract funds for further research for a cure. But like I said, it's very hard to find that information. You need to really start actively looking for it yourself.
Yes, and it would be good if we could start asking NAPWHA or even ASHM for that matter about some people that could write articles to inform people a bit more about it, to get it in the sphere so that people are giving it a bit more thought. Because I just haven't put any serious thought into it because it's not something I can go. But I'm interested for other people. Like, just because I might not benefit doesn't mean I'm not interested. And, I don't think positive living comes out anymore, but the various, even PosLink, whatever the various media people can do for us, HIV media, might be useful to encourage them to start talking about this issue a bit more.
That's a good point, David, and it is actually happening right now. This video is a part of it. The mechanisms or the wheels are turning right now in terms of publicising and getting the word out there, getting more information out there and making sure that people are aware that the researchers are onto it, the trials are happening, They'll be wanting more people to participate. So no doubt in 2023, there'll be quite an awareness of cure and what it's all about in the media. Perhaps not in the general media, but at least in the HIV sector and the community, more and more people will have an opportunity to hear about it. It'll start to pick up. The news will start to pick up and we'll hear more about it. Just one more thing that interests me as well when we talk about one of the things to anticipate if we, just a scenario, just a hypothetical. What if there was a cure tomorrow? Would we do it? Would you take it?
Well, there's so many other things you'd want to ask before you say it.
Not that simple.
No.
Well, that's the thing. What would you think? What if you were offered the cure tomorrow? What would be going around in your head?
I would ask Jenny Hoy, who's my doctor anyway, and, very smart mind in research about what the potential damages or dangers were. And I'd hope that it was the person offering it to me had medical knowledge and knew that I was a potential beneficiary. Otherwise, you'd have to ask why someone's, offering you this cure that, didn't really know what they were talking about. I'd really like some sort of workup by a couple of my doctors.
Yeah.
But I have a diabetes doctor, I have a heart doctor, I have a range of other specialists. I'd want them to be informed too. So it wouldn't be yes, I'm going to do it straight away. Sorry.
So you'd want a full endorsement of all the people that are involved in your care.
That is exactly right.
Yeah, which makes sense.
Yeah, very similar. Look, we all take medical direction the same as and anything else that you do to manage your health. And if it's about vaccinations or whatever it is, your doctors give you guidance on what is good for you and what you should consider. And the same, like changing medication for HIV, or does it affect your bones? Does it affect whatever it may affect? Like I said earlier, we're all so very different with other existing conditions we may have, that whatever the cure is, we need to consider that in context of the full set of conditions we have got, and then work out, is it going to work for us? What are other potential side effects? Most likely there will be, and that's what you then need to weigh up. And then ultimately, the decision will be with us, but it will be with very clear medical guidance on what we should consider in making that decision.
And I'd go a bit more philosophical about it too, because, I'm 70. I never expected to make it, but there you go. But for me, the idea that I'm going to make 80 is a little bit out of the question. But if I took this cure, would I be a healthy person at 80? And I think the answer is probably no. And so you have to ask yourself, is it worth the extra kind of stress on your system when I have a reasonable quality of life now? Is there a risk doing this more so than not doing it? And because I'd be a bit of a guinea pig, given, I've lived for a long time with it, I'd have to weigh up in my head whether I could live with the risk versus just doing what I'm doing now, which is, I know isn't a long-term proposition anyway. I don't want to be negative about it, but I think that's being realistic. I know my body's aging very rapidly.
It's a good point, David, because it's about quality of life. And, if you feel that your quality of life is pretty good at the moment, taking this drug, what kind of impact would that have on your quality of life, even if it does extend your life by a certain number of years? But what quality is that? So that's something you have to think about. Yeah, absolutely. One more thing, another interesting point that I think people need to be aware of is, and again, another hypothetical, we're all cured, okay? We've just taken our drug and we're cured as of today. Now, the prospect is, of course, of getting HIV again if we putting ourselves at risk of getting it again if we are, whether it's having sex or any other kind of situation where we may be at risk of acquiring HIV again? Would we go on PrEP? Would we be advised by our GP or clinician? You know, it might be a good idea to go on PrEP now because, you know, you don't really want to get it again, do you? Do we do that? Do we take a daily pill to avoid getting HIV again? Or do on-demand PrEP? There's a few options in how we do PrEP today. If the option is there that, you know, we can go on PrEP to avoid getting HIV again. How does that sound?
I think it depends how sexually active you are, Vic. And whether if you've got a partner and you don't play away from home, then, you know, you probably don't have a risk. I'd like to think I don't have one, but yeah, who knows? I would consider it if I thought I was going to have an active sex life, but the older you get, the less likely that's going to happen.
What do you think, Jerry?
Yeah,
I'm popping a pill every day to avoid getting HIV again, even though it's something you already do.
Yeah, well, I already do. I'm used to that. But no, to tell you the truth, once again, I'm not sexually active anymore. I'm over 60, so hopefully I wouldn't have, if that was the scenario and we could be cured. I don't think that I'd be at risk. A bit like David, I wouldn't be at risk. I wouldn't need to take that pill every day. So that whether I'd be willing to if I was...
Well, I'm sure there'll be some people out there who are probably thinking differently and thinking, okay. Maybe,
I don't know. Maybe a cure would, you know, stimulate my sex life again. I think, oh my God!
That's right. Exactly. That's right.
Maybe I'll be reborn.
That would be a great selling point if it was going to offer that. Jerry, we'd be all in that.
It comes. The new cure pill comes with inbuilt
Viagra.
Anti-aging.
or something.
Yeah, anti-aging.
Well, yeah, I was going to say it might be good for men. What do you think in terms of say being cured today? What about tomorrow? What happens tomorrow? What do you do to avoid HIV again?
I think it's something you consider at the time, but yeah, that's a bit too far away for me to make any decisions on right now. But yeah, I certainly think a cure is still quite a few years away, and then the cure may still require you to take other medication, or I don't know. Yeah, a cure is a cure, so you expect it to all be gone, but what really is the treatment to cure you? It's just a bit hypothetical. So I'll wait till we get to know more about the cure.
See what happens. And it's interesting, David, you mentioned before about being a guinea pig, and that's the thing. How long, in terms of, say, something does come out and people start taking a drug or whatever it is, ends up being in terms of the method of delivery, whatever it is, you know, how long does it take before people can go on it without being a guinea pig, you know, without feeling like they're being a guinea pig? So how many years does it take for something to be established and people know that there isn't a risk of medium or long-term effects? You know, sometimes we still feel like we're guinea pigs with HIV antivirals each time a new drug comes out. So yeah, how long does it take till we stop feeling like we're a guinea pig?
No, well, I haven't had any change of treatments for about 7 or 8 years, so that feeling has sort of left me a bit.
All right, everyone. Thanks very much for that.
Thank you.
Thanks for organising.
Yeah.
Thanks.